Hi everyone, it is Kimber, the study abroad specialist here. And in today's video, we are going to be answering a question that I hear quite a bit, and that is about how easy study abroad courses are. So before we get started, go ahead and click the like button on this video. You haven't watched it yet, but you're gonna like it. And then click the subscribe button as well. And then also share this video with any other person in your network who you know might be interested in study abroad. They are gonna wanna hear this too. So in talking about, whether or not study abroad courses are easier or harder, I'm definitely going to be speaking obviously from my own experience, particularly as an American studying abroad, both in London and in Italy as well. But you may be someone who maybe you've had a different experience. And so I would love to hear about that in the comment section. But I would say that number one for me, in terms of realizing that study abroad classes were harder was the fact that there was an entire differently sort of grading system than what I was used to here in the US, and the fact that kind of what that grade meant in terms of success as well. So, here in the US, and as a, US citizen who's been born and raised here and gone through this education system until I had gone abroad, it's all about like getting A's and sometimes maybe B's. That's our grading system. It may be different in your country. And again, like I realize that as an American, like we are definitely, everything is hardwired towards academics. It is a lot different in other parts of the country of the world, where a lot of things are based much more on experience, and like academics may be accessible for some people, but in terms of like college and things, that may not be as high of a value. But here in this country, it is a very important thing. And so I think that for me, like I struggled the most with sort of learning what it meant to, let's say, have like maybe I saw the number 70 or 72 on a paper when I was in the UK. And in the UK, that's actually like a high grade, but like here in the US, that's basically like a low grade. That's a C. That means you're barely passing. And even though I realize that it's just a number, and of course, like I got more familiar over time. In a blog post I wrote about this that's in the description box, I sort of tell a story about the first essay that I ever got back. And I thought that I had completely failed because I saw like a lower grade than what I thought. And then that was kind of the first time I realized that the grading system was different. And I spoke with the professor after class, and he had to explain it to me. And then he was like, oh my God, like, you're an American, I get it. Like you are thinking something totally different. And so I had to sort of like check myself and do a little bit more research and sort of learn more about that. But I think that that is something that students sort of struggle with. And it could be where you're the reverse. Maybe you're coming from a country where, maybe your academics were not as good. And then when you get to the US, maybe it's something like where you are coming from a different country and you come to a place like the US, and maybe you suddenly see yourself excelling. And so maybe you have like the opposite effect. But I think that one of the things that students sort of struggle with is really starting to understand, like, what does it mean to be successful in a study abroad class? So in the country that you are going to, what does success look for like for them? So it may not just be where like, you're just turning in the essay and then they just grade it. Maybe you actually have to be able to properly defend your arguments in front of the class or something like that. There are all different rules around that. So you definitely want to understand, for whatever country you are going to study abroad, how do they define success for their students, and how can you best acclimate to that and prepare ahead of time so that you are prepared and you are aware of what to expect, and you don't sort of go in maybe lowballing yourself and then you don't do as well, or maybe you go in like super confident and then it doesn't turn out as great for you. You definitely want to sort of set those expectations, and the only way to do that is sort of to understand, in that particular country or in that particular education system, what is most important to them, what is most valuable, and what sort of determines success. So for number two, this one is very important to me, and it's going to come off a bit crass. It's going to sound like I am bashing the United States. I definitely am not. I love this country so much, wouldn't want to be born anywhere else. But I definitely realize that as an American student, I definitely understand why we are so behind and why we have been for decades and decades. It doesn't matter what president it is, what political party is in power. That overall, our education system is so behind. I had always heard about that, but I didn't actually get it until I went abroad. And now I understand why. And there are so many different factors that I'm not going to get into in this video that play into that. But one of the sort of baseline things that um, sort of in a way like sets Americans up, and there may be some other countries that do it, but I know it was a lot different than what I saw, let's say like in the UK or in other parts of Europe, is that there's so much of a focus on just sort of stuffing in information and then regurgitating it and not actually learning it. I think that that is a problem across the board. I don't think that it is based on, what economic level you're in. It isn't based on what race you are, again, what political affiliation you are. It's just a part of the culture itself. It's a part of our academic culture. Now, again, there are some elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, colleges that do it a lot differently and that have tried to shift away from this. But I think that overall, like as a culture, at least here in the US, it's all about just about the quickness of, like you go into this classroom, you sort of learn this thing, the teacher throws it at you, you have all of this like pointless homework. And I realize this is turning into a rant, but I really don't care at this point. You have all this pointless homework, sort of study for the test, you sort of write it down, you spit it back out, and then you get your grade. When I actually got to Europe, it was completely different than that. And it was much more about critical thinking. So a huge part of that was about not just being able to spit things out, but about actually processing them. So most of my classes when I was in London and in Florence were very heavily based on discussion. So it was about discussion, about critical thinking, about an exchange of ideas between people who may not disagree and may not agree with each other. That is also something that I feel a lot of times here in US education is not necessarily supported. It's more about, well, maybe the teacher is guiding it and they think something. And then if you disagree with the teacher, that's not looked upon positively. And I could go down a rabbit hole about that, but I won't today. But I will just say that I think that that is another thing to consider, is that depending on what country you're going to and what country you're coming from, really you need to sort of learn and think about what are the ways that, what is going to be expected of you in the way that you perform in the classroom. So sort of like what we talked about in point one, like what does it mean to be successful? And, in terms of that hardness versus easiness, like if you are a student who you just been used to, sort of memorizing like for the test, or like, doing flashcards and things like that. If you are going to a country where it's much more about like you have to sort of put in that analytical thinking and really be like a critical thinker and really sort of be able to analyze, you potentially could struggle a lot more. I know that for me, particularly my first time when I had to be asked to do that, it was just a lot different because again, like I was, I've been raised here in the US and went to undergrad here. And while there were definitely some fabulous teachers that I've had that have taken me through a lot of challenging things, a lot of my time was just spent like everyone else, where it's just you're memorizing things and you're just expected to spit it back out and then you forget it, 10 minutes later. And I would definitely say, and I've said this before, that I feel that in my 2 years in grad school in the UK, I probably learned more and retained more that I still use today than in all of my time here in the US. And that includes from the time that I was a little kid to the time that I was in college. And it's not that I personally changed myself. I've always been a very good student, very motivated student, but it was the way that it was presented to me, the way that it was given to me, and what the expectations were. It wasn't just where I was just quickly learning it, spitting it back out, and then getting a grade. I was actually meant to actually learn it, digest it, and own it. And that was a difference for me. And so that definitely made it much more challenging. And I think that depending on, kind of where you're going, you may find that you run into that as well. So for the last point that I have It is about, it sort of follows on from the first 2 points, but it is really thinking about the fact of, I know for me, again, as I said, sort of going from the sort of standard US cultural model of, like you always have busy work and you're basically just kind of learning and regurgitating, to really doing a lot of independent study, was not necessarily a challenge for me. I really like that because, again, I like doing a lot of independent work myself. But I think that, if I hadn't been someone who was kind of already really structured and really kind of organized, that I definitely would have suffered from that, because I kind of wouldn't have known where to go, and there wouldn't have been someone there kind of always holding my hand. In the way that it sort of happens in the US cultural system, where it's like, there's these constant check-ins with, like your advisor, and there's all this different type of structure that people sort of provide for you, that in a lot of ways didn't really exist, at least where I was, in my programs in the UK and in Italy, where it was a lot more self-guided. And I enjoyed that, as I said, but I think that for some students, they may have found that a lot harder. And again, I think that that comes down to just really understanding the sort of cultural differences within education in whatever country you're going to, and what those expectations are. That is one of the things I really try to work with students on when I advise them. But I think that too, it's just about having realistic expectations and understanding that, even if you were just there, it's a lot different if you're in a graduate program or something, because you're there for a longer period of time. But even if you're just there for, 4 or 5 months, and you are going to be taking instruction from people who are, locally and from the culture, that they may have these different expectations, and you're only going to be of a benefit if you kind of go into it understanding what it is. It doesn't mean that you're going to get it perfect. It doesn't mean that you're going to even enjoy all of it. You probably won't. And that, you may feel that sense of struggle, but at least if you can learn about it beforehand, you will not be caught off guard. So I feel like that is definitely an important point as well. So, in answering the question as quickly as we can in this short amount of time that we have, of whether or not study abroad classes are easier or harder, I would say that for me, they were definitely a lot harder than the classes I had been taking in undergrad. Now, once I got to grad school, it was a little bit different, actually, because again, I had had that preparation of, I had gone to the UK before. And so I kind of knew what to expect. But my very first time around, it was definitely a lot harder, because again, I was very confused about the grading system. So that threw me for a loop. I was sort of kind of caught off guard about like what the expectations were, in terms of like what success meant. And then also to kind of getting out of that mode of just like being able to regurgitate things and memorize them and actually sort of learning them was really new for me. But I would say that they were harder for me. I know that there have been some students who, they may go someplace, and depending, it also depends too on what your major is. I mean, for me, like someone who was in communications and business and things like that, it's a little bit more intricate. But if you were doing something else, like maybe art studies, maybe it's a little bit easier. Not saying that that is super easy, but it may be a little bit more translatable, or maybe it's on par with where you're coming from. Um, but I would just say that overall, I don't want people to go into it thinking that it's just going to be this easy, fun time. It can definitely be as challenging or more challenging than the classes that you have currently on your campus. So definitely keep that in mind. Okay, and so that is it for today's video. I hope, like all of my videos, that this has been helpful for you as you start to think about, what you want to do with your study abroad journey. I would love to hear down in the comments, are you someone who maybe you study abroad in your undergraduate career or your high school career, and now you're doing grad school abroad, or are you just getting started? Leave a comment below and tell me more about what your plans are. And then also too, if you are interested in getting some one-on-one help, I do offer very student budget friendly advisement sessions. And so go ahead and click the link below in the description box to learn more about that and to sign up. And I will see you in the next video.